I'm Jim Pearson. I've been with Xcel Energy coming up on 11 years, and my role at the company is kind of twofold. I'm one of three people who represent the company at the state capitol, so I do some lobbying work. And then, as Doug mentioned, I'm also our community affairs person for the city of St. Paul, so that gives me the opportunity to work with Mayor Carter, City Council, and that's kind of a nice blend. I've got a lot of operational issues with the city of St. Paul and resolving some of that stuff, and of course it's fun to be engaged in the policy space as well. So fun to be over here on the other side of the river. I live over on the east side. I'm in St. Paul, running around all the time. This is a great excuse to come over and spend some time in South Minneapolis. So I thought I would use a small slide deck. There's probably 13, 14 slides to kind of guide the conversation, but my style is always I'd rather engage and have a conversation and get into questions than just talk at you. So I'll try to present some information. Hopefully it will touch on some points. I know there's some familiar faces here, Daryl and others, so I know I'm going to get some questions and probably some questions I can't answer, but we'll give it a shot. So I thought I'd start by just talking a little bit about our company. We are headquartered in Minneapolis, as most of you probably know. But we do have service territory and customers in 8 states. So the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, North and South Dakota, Colorado, and then parts of New Mexico and Texas as well. We have a total of 3.6 million customers. We're a natural gas utility as well. And those 5 points are kind of what we want to talk a little bit about. We take a lot of pride in particular in our wind development. We have been a national leader in wind development for over a decade. Storm restoration is on that list as well. That's again something we take tremendous amount of pride in. I know go back a couple of years, we had some storms come through the Twin Cities, lost almost 500,000 customers. You know, those are really challenging events, and that's when our customers need us most. So that's certainly a focus too. So these are our priorities. So this is kind of the lens in which we approach conversation and work internally. Leading the clean energy transition. We're going to talk a little bit more about that and what that means. Enhancing the customer experience. So that is something that I think maybe flies under the radar a little bit. This is an area where we're really starting to invest because technology, our business, everything is changing, and customers they care a lot more about what we do, and they're much more engaged. They want to know how we make our product, how they use the product. So there's a lot of new tools coming. The one area we started in is in storm restoration. We just have a lot more at our disposal now to communicate with our customers when there is an outage. Are we aware of it? Are we tracking it? What's the estimated restoration time? And so over time now, you're going to start to see a lot of new products from the company to inform you as customers on what we're doing. In order to be good at that, we have to make a lot of investment into our grid to allow for some better communication and tools and enhancements and such. So all of that is underway. And then, of course, cost. Cost is always important. And so those things go hand in hand. The more tools we give to our customers, the more they understand how they use our product and how they use energy, when they use energy. If they have tools, even if the rate is changing a little bit, if they've got tools to manage how they're using it, then we can keep bills low. So those are our priorities, and we'll talk a little bit more about them. Leading the clean energy transition, of course, what does that mean? So in December, our President CEO, Chairman Ben Folk, came out with an announcement. He said, company-wide, 8 states wide, we want to get to a carbon-free electric generation system by 2050. That was quite an announcement. Nobody in our industry had made such a bold announcement. So that set us down a path about, well, what does that mean? How are you going to get there? But that forward step is really important, and again, it informs how we do our work. We have a plan, as you all know, that we put forth to the Public Utilities Commission in July. This will get us on track to reduce our carbon emissions by 80% over a 2005 baseline by 2030. That we know how to do. That's what our plan is. And that's what the conversation and some of the public meetings will be about, is that plan, and we're very confident in that process going forward. The carbon-free by 2050 is a bigger challenge. At the same time, if you don't set that goal, if you don't set that direction, you'll never meet it. So those are some key components about leading the clean energy transition. I talked a little bit about the customer experience, and again, allowing people to have more access, understand their usage better, time of day pricing. There's all sorts of things that fit into that if we give them the knowledge. And then of course, keeping bills low. Being under the national average is certainly a goal of the company. Adding renewable energy in a cost-effective way, that's something that we're quite passionate about. When we started in wind in the mid-90s, it was a very expensive resource. Now it's our lowest. And so adding that at the right time is of course, very important. So let me dive into Minnesota a little bit. In Minnesota, we have 1.3 million electric customers. We are a natural gas utility on the east side of the river. So you in Minneapolis have CenterPoint. We are both the electric and gas distribution utility in St. Paul. That keeps me busy over there too. There's gives me a little bit more to do. And of course, reliability in Minnesota is high. And this is something that, again, is a critical component to what we do. If the lights don't come on when the customer flicks a switch or needs to charge a phone or whatever, that's obviously a huge problem. And so you expand that from homeowners to businesses. Production equipment has become much more sophisticated, so an outage can have a much bigger impact economically to some of our commercial customers as well. So that reliability and that investment is obviously critical. So I wanted to, again, come back to this because it's sort of what we're working hardest on and the theme of our conversation tonight. The one thing I'd like to point out and just reemphasize is where we're at today in 2018, and or 2019, I guess. We are 38%, or we've been able to lower our carbon emissions by 38% over that 2005 baseline already. I mentioned moving toward 80, and I mentioned our 2050 goal. Just to put that in a little context, again, we had a lot of conversation around the Clean Power Plan when President Obama was in office, and that was, again, a nationwide standard where we were trying to meet carbon reduction goals. And that set essentially, I'm rounding a little bit, but essentially a 30% reduction from that 2005 baseline by 2030. So we're there today. We're proud of that. It's important. And of course, we are moving aggressively beyond that as well. But again, just to give you a reference point on what these percentages mean. Same thing, it's just what our trajectory is. And so as you see where we're at and you move into the lighter shaded area, that's our estimation. You can see when we start pulling our coal fleet offline, up in Becker we have 3 units. The first one will close in 2023, the second in 2026, and the last one in 2030. That obviously is a huge part of that downward trend.
Can I interrupt? What are you going to replace the coal with?
We'll get there.
Okay.
I've got a slide for you, Daryl. So getting back to our integrated resource plan that we have in front of the commission, these are kind of the bedrock or the foundation in which that plan is based. I mentioned the closure of our coal fleet. We have one coal plant that I hadn't mentioned. That's the one in Oak Park Heights, out by where I live in Stillwater there. And that is also now projected to close a decade earlier than previously planned. So retiring all of the coal fleet in the state of Minnesota is obviously a key component to reaching deep and aggressive carbon reduction. Adding renewables. That is a big piece.
Our coal generated power doesn't only come from Minnesota. We import some coal generated power.
Right, and we'll come back to that. We add some complexity when we start talking about that. So adding renewable energy, we are in the midst of our largest wind build out in our company. So we are in different stages with 8 different wind farms across Minnesota and Dakota and Iowa. That's adding about 1,850 megawatts of wind, and we're in that process. By doing so, we up our wind production, or our wind capacity, by 70%. So we are in the midst of that. As we get all of those projects online and we start moving into the 2022 and mid-2020s, we project adding around 3,000 megawatts of solar. Again, this doesn't happen all at one time, but that's, as the wind build-out nears completion, the projection on solar costs, we want to continue to take advantage of that, and so you'll see this wind and solar development through the 2020s. Our nuclear fleet.
You wouldn't have used up the wind resource, so why are you backing off on wind?
We're not backing off, it's just a matter of what we're adding at what time. So as things come offline, you have to continue to make those investments. So we're the only utility in Minnesota that has nuclear. And so we have nuclear at 2 sites, 3 reactors, 2 sites, 1 in Monticello, and then 2 reactors in Red Wing. Nuclear is more of a complicated conversation in terms of how the state and federal government regulates it. Those plants don't operate without operating licenses, and the current expiration of those licenses is 2030, 2033, and 2034. So in order to, again, achieve this aggressive carbon reduction, we need to lean on our nuclear fleet. We have taken the first step in this integrated resource plan and worked with the community in Monticello, and we are proposing to extend the Monticello plant from 2030 to 2040. So that's part of this conversation we're in.
Are there any plans for construction of new nuclear power plants?
No. In fact, we, by state law, were prohibited from considering building a new nuclear plant as part of our IRP process. But no, what we're trying to do is leverage the existing resources that we have, those assets. And I do have to call out my friends in the nuclear side of our business. They have done an amazing job over the last 3 years in particular of really taking cost out of the normal operations. Safety is number one, and if you've ever had an opportunity to do a tour at one of our plants, it's a very interesting tour. These people are very dedicated to what they do, very dedicated to safety. That is number one. The amount of redundancy in those plants is really quite interesting, and to be able to ensure that safety and take cost out of the equation as they've done over the last number of years has been great. And then the last component is how do we make this transition? How do we move from kind of what our fleet has historically been, dispatchable resources, to more intermittent resources? And we have learned a ton about how you manage an intermittent resource on our system, but we are continuing to use natural gas to bridge that. So for example, in St. Paul, we have the High Bridge power plant. I spend a fair amount of time there. That used to be a coal facility. We repowered that to natural gas a number of years ago, I think in 2007, somewhere around there, and that plant runs as needed instead of the coal plant that would run more consistently. So those are kind of the building blocks of our integrated resource plan. Daryl, this gets to your question. This is how our mix is going, and so as you see, we get to the bottom chart there, 2030. Coal is out of the equation. It has been primarily replaced by renewables and then some increase in natural gas. And then again, if we had the 2050 bar chart there, again, that's where we're going. How do we then take the 2030 chart and get that by 2050 to carbon free? Energy efficiency is a huge component of this conversation as well. And so as you talk about the integrated resource plan, you'll see a lot of more aggressive programs and information around how we give our customers the tools to conserve. We always say that the cheapest kilowatt hour is the one you don't produce. So we've had great success in this. We started in the 90s with energy efficiency. It really ramped up in the mid 2000s with some enabling legislation. And we're quite proud of the programs that we offer our customers. We have over 150 different programs. Some of them are more off the shelf, some of them are custom, but there's a whole suite of things to help customers manage their bills. Our role in the Minnesota economy is also pretty significant. We have roughly 7,800 jobs here in Minnesota. They break down between people like me who are employees of the company and contractors that we use both at our plants and for other tasks. We spend over $630 million in the local economy doing what we do. And of course, property taxes is a big part of the equation as well. I would note on the property tax piece, we are the state's largest property taxpayer, and that is primarily a result of utilities and pipelines are taxed differently than any other business. So we all pay real property tax, as do we. So on the property we own and such, we pay tax just like every business, but we also pay personal property tax on our equipment. So all of our poles and wires, all of that value is assessed, and then there's a tax on that as well. That's what gets that number to north of $200 million. This is, again, we take a lot of pride in our employees, investing in our employees, and also looking ahead on workforce issues. Any good business also thinks about, well, what's coming next? And so we have put, we've put a lot of emphasis on our relationship with the military and veteran hiring. We've also have a corporate goal of diversifying our workforce, our technical field positions, our other staffing positions, and so we are proud of some of these numbers. Obviously, more work to do, but we are proud of some of the progress that we've made over the last number of years. And then the last slide here is talks a little bit about, again, some volunteer work. We also have a foundation. So our foundation kind of operates in 4 different areas: arts and culture and environment, and those are 2 of the 4. And we also do a day of service, which is done in September, and that's an opportunity to be out with partnering with nonprofits and our employees and our community members working on various projects. So in September, when we had our day of service in 2019, I was at the Hallie Q. Brown Center. We were doing a lot of different things, and what I was most impressed about is, I think of the dozen or 15 people we had there that day, half of them were from the neighborhood, and that was fun. You know, it's really kind of a neat time to get up early on a Saturday morning. You bring 15 people in to a task. You take care of it pretty quick. Have some fun along the way, and so you add up that, and again, we are proud of some of the efforts that our employees have given. Of course, we work and live in this community and care a lot about it as well. So, so that's kind of my overview. Hopefully, I've given you some things to kind of think about. I stayed at a pretty high level, so I'm sure. Well, I hope I've awakened some curiosity, and we can dive into a few questions as well. Daryl.
It doesn't quite fit in the flow of your presentation, but what are you doing as far as, I'm thinking California, their trouble with their grid is so run down, wore out, used up. What are Xcel doing to upgrade and keep us out of those kinds of grid failure problems?
So that's obviously a long answer. There's a great deal of investment. We have a subset of employees who have been tasked, and they've been working on this for a number of years. I guess I would sum it up as saying stay tuned. We are weeks away from putting a proposal again in front of the commission about what type of investments we're going to make. Largely, these investments are going to be focused on communication, allowing two-way communication on the grid, so we're better able to assess vulnerabilities. We're faster to respond if there's an equipment failure and an outage. It allows us to speak to our customer more effectively. So these are the type of investments that we're going to do. We did make a filing similar in Colorado already, and we've started down that path, and so we can talk a little bit more about that. But that's really our next big move. We've got our IRP, we've got this, and other things to come. So we're always in front
Does it have to be a big investment?
Does it have to be a big
It
investment?
does have to be.
It does, correct. Just because of the scale of our operations.
Yes.
Right.
The number of lines that you
Right.
have up there.
Right. And I don't have to tell this audience, the power system and the power, we've kind of gone from the old model where, it was either in the core of the city, then we moved it out and we bring that power one way back on a transmission system to a sub down to your home. Well, that's not that simple anymore. We've got two-way power flow because homes and businesses others are generating and bringing it back onto the grid. And so that obviously is all part of our ongoing work to make sure that the reliability and the stability and the investment in the grid infrastructure is there. So, yes, sir.
Yeah, you mentioned for your 2030 goals, you pretty much know how you're going to get there.
Mm-hmm.
The 2050 goals were trickier. How much is that reliant on new technologies that haven't been developed yet?
I wouldn't say it's dependent on new technologies that have been developed yet, but we are counting on some existing technologies going to commercialization. So the obvious one is battery storage. So we are looking at, let me back up. In Colorado, we've got 3 pilots right now where we have large batteries paired with solar arrays. So these are like 100 megawatt type arrays with generally 4-hour storage. The battery would be sized about that. And so as we gather information and we watch the market change, and you make some of these investments in that market, again, it helps bring these things to commercialization. So that's one that certainly comes to mind. Obviously, if we built new nuclear plants, you could go and meet the goal by retiring everything else. That's not necessarily the conversation. In fact, that's not the conversation. So we are counting on technologies evolving. We're not banking on something that we don't know about, but we are banking on some commercialization and obviously watching the economics. Carbon capture and storage is something that ongoing research still is evolving, and so that's another example of something that we're watching that maybe is not quite to prime time yet, but perhaps not far away. So those are a couple of examples of things that we're really engaged in. Sure. Lee.
Yeah, speaking of I saw 3,000 megawatts of solar by 2030. I noticed in the actual text of the 15-year plan, it only projects 20 megawatts of distributed rooftop and community solar, but each year between 2021 and 2034, whereas just last year, 2,000 or 200 megawatts were added in 2018 of rooftop and community solar. And I'm wondering why is there this? Why is there like a 97% drop? I can't really believe that it could possibly be because of market conditions.
Sure. So, I guess we look at it as kind of a total. Obviously, the idea behind all of these numbers and this whole process is the goal. We have to look at how much energy our customers are going to need from us and how we're going to deliver that energy. Those are kind of the two pieces of the IRP process. And so those things have to balance, have to match. And so we look at our future need, and there's a whole conversation about, are you with energy efficiency and all sorts of things going on in the marketplace, and maybe you throw EVs into the equation, what that future need's going to look like, and then how you're going to meet it. So we look at it as kind of a total. So if the planning total, based on what our customers are probably going to need and what we estimate how we meet that need, we see that is solar's contribution. Now the community solar garden program is a kind of a unique fixture when we have to take that energy. So if 3,000 is the number, whatever the number of gardens is, which will be determined on a lot of different factors, we take that. We cannot turn that away. So whatever that number is, that is part of it. The other number is just based on kind of our solar rewards program. Historically, how much investment the $5 million generates. So again, these numbers, I wouldn't get too focused in on the exact numbers. It's sort of the overall solar bucket, and you're going to see continued programs like Solar Rewards get thought about, as well as the Garden program, and as well as what we call universal solar. So it's more, I would think of it as kind of the total, and don't get too fixated on how that total breaks down. Sure.
But if your slides stated that you were going to be focused on your customers' interests, there's a huge interest in community solar and distributed solar. So cutting back so dramatically on that just doesn't seem to be serving your customers' interests.
So I apologize if I've given you the impression we're cutting back. We're not. So Solar Rewards has been a program that we've offered to help buy down the cost of rooftop solar to our customers. We've offered that since 2011. That is supported by roughly $5 million out of the Renewable Development Account per year, and that amount of money drives a certain amount of capacity every year. The legislature has authorized that program to continue through 2021, I believe. And so to the extent they extend it or whatever, that we have to obviously watch the legislative conversation. But that program continues, that amount of investment continues, so it's really unchanged. And as I mentioned, the Solar Garden program, we have to take what comes onto our system. So we don't have the ability to throttle it down if we wanted to do that. If third-party developers are finding subscribers and finding sites and locating that on our system, we have to buy that energy. So again, we have different projections about how much will come on. It has been a little bit of a challenge in trying to project that accurately, but whatever the number is what will come on. And then after we take those two numbers, we look at how much large-scale solar do we still need, and how do we go about making that investment. So that's kind of how the solar pieces fit together. Sure.
You talked about battery storage projects out in Colorado. What chemistry are those batteries using?
Now that's a question I can't answer. I do not know. They're lithium-ion batteries. That's about the extent of my knowledge on the specifics. However, I'd be happy to follow up and put you in contact with the folks that are engaged, the technical people engaged in those projects.
Thank you.
Sure, John.
Jim, you talked about all of the wind and solar resources that you're going to be having. And of course, wind and solar are very dispersed energy sources. Can you talk a bit about long-distance, high-voltage transmission system that's going to be necessary to provide you with that power?
Well, you've hit on it. We need more investment in transmission in order to be successful. The wind build-out that we are in the middle of right now, that's, as I mentioned, about 1,850 megawatts of wind across 8 sites. Those sites are dispersed across southern Minnesota and North and South Dakota, different locations. So we are going to need to continue to invest in the transmission system. Currently, we have a transmission line that has been approved by the Public Utilities Commission, and construction will start soon. And that connects essentially North Mankato down to Winnebago. So it's about a 50-mile line, and that line is being constructed, again, as there's a constraint in that particular area. As you bring renewable energy from the west into the load center here in the Twin Cities and beyond, that's the constraint that has been identified, and so that project is going forth. So this is a little bit, I don't want to get too wonky here, but we have a regional grid operator, MISO. It's something that is critically important to what we do. Gets pretty wonky pretty fast. But this is a regional RTO that covers essentially from Manitoba in the north to Louisiana to the Western Dakotas to half of Indiana and that whole region. They run the grid essentially. They are the ones who maintain reliability standards and dispatch our plants and all their utilities and so forth. So anytime you're talking about transmission, anytime you're going through this, there's a planning process that obviously you have to go through. There's analysis done, and that's again a big part of how this will get built. Most people will remember the transmission investments we made recently. If you go up Highway 94 toward Fargo, all of that transmission was built. There was a Brookings line from Brookings down to the southern Dakota County. Some of you who may be down there from time to time may remember that. We've got a line going down again from the southern part of the Twin Cities toward La Crosse, Madison. So these investments are being made. Those investments were largely new because the last time we made significant investment like that was in the 70s. And so those 11 utilities got together. We formed the CapEx 2020 partnership, and we went and were able to make those investments. As you talk about more and more renewable energy on the system, we're going to need another round of investment. And so when we are at the legislature talking about higher renewable energy standards, what have you, that's the other side of the coin, is if you want more intermittent resources, and bring that into the load center, we got to make sure we don't forget about that transmission system. Yes, sir.
And do you have any plan for some existing power plant, some part converted to the renewable energy?
We do not at this time. We looked at that, especially up in Becker. Can you take some of those units and repower them? It's always kind of it's a very specific case-by-case analysis. The one thing I really omitted to say, but I think is really important, when we go through this planning process, it's a 15-year forward look. We redo this every 2 to 3 years. And so as market and things change, there's new analysis always being done. So I would never want to take that off the table, but as I stand here today, we don't have any proposals that would just repower an existing facility. Steve.
IRP versus IDP, they're related. Some people in this room might know, integrated distribution plan. We've been talking about where the resources come from and the transmission level, but the advanced meters
right.
and communications, maybe that's what you're alluding to. Expand on that, and specifically, do you see those two coming together in single filings?
I do not see them coming together in a single filing. I do think they'll follow different tracks. The one is sort of the resource generation piece of that. The other is...
Quite catch exactly what he's outlining. So could you review what he outlined?
Sure. So we're talking about the integrated resource plan, which is kind of the generation side of the coin. And he's asking a little bit about our distribution plan. So how do we're looking at this annually and in 5-year increments too. What investments need to happen on the distribution side? So that's why I think it'll be a little different filing. I think the latter issue is probably connected more to a rate case issue than it would be a resource issue, because we're making these investments, so you get into the conversation about how do you recover the investments, how do you do that in an equitable way, how do you do that over time so you don't experience rate shock. So I think those things maybe have a little closer alignment than the IRP process. But I probably should bone up on it a little bit more. Things are changing so fast ahead of the filing and the details and such. So we're weeks away from that filing. So I think if we were sitting here in December or in January, I would have a lot more detail to share.
Well, I welcome you back.
Oh, great. Okay. Yes, sir.
Yes. I always wonder about base load. So right now, I think your base load occurs at night, and it's like 20%. Do you have a plan for how you're going to take care of base load?
So I just want to make sure I understand the question. When you say our base load takes place at night.
So this is like the minimum that you have to have to run
Sure.
the system.
Okay, so yeah, we talk about our demand curve, and obviously at night when most businesses are not operating and people are sleeping, that's our point of lowest demand.
So I'm going to be talking about over the long term. So we're like right now in Becker you have nuclear plants, and there's insurance company that has a $2 billion server farm right there by Becker, because those plants are there to run at night, and they need that power at night over the long term. So thinking about that application, which they located it right near Becker, just for that reason, how are you going to handle something like that at night when they use tons and tons of power?
Sure. So again, it's that making, it always has to be in balance. Whatever we're generating has to match what our customers are using. So to the extent, that's changing. So the Monticello nuclear facility is there. So that provides kind of that dispatchable. The plants have a very high capacity factor. They run in the low 90s in terms of their capacity factor. So they are running all the time. And then again, depending on what our certain circumstances are, we have to have something dispatchable. If the wind is not blowing, we do tend to get nice wind resources at night. So if we're not able to utilize that, then obviously you have to turn something else on that's dispatchable, which is gas. And so I mentioned the gas plant in the town I'm in St. Paul. That's an example of something. If we start to see that low curve, where it was very still, and we started to needing to make sure that the reliability and the voltage levels, that's when you turn on a gas plant. And the value of having those type of resources is they are quickly dispatchable. We can get a gas plant up and running in a matter of 15 to 20 minutes in some cases. So that's that reliability piece, and obviously we have a lot of people in our company who spend a lot of time ensuring that the lights don't go out, or that's a great example about why that reliability is so critical.
Yeah, so I mean that what's the biggest insurance company you're the health something company, but anyway, so that server farm there has to run, and they've got backup after backup after backup in there, and I've always thought, what are they going to do for your base load to provide that power that they need to run those computers, and it has to run 100% because they can't have a crash or anything.
Right. And so we have multiple feeders. So we have different levels of redundancy at that facility as well, or any facility that would meet, has that critical load. And so if we had an outage on something, we can feed them from a different side. So those things are real, and those things are obviously very, very important. And that's why it's not by accident that we have plants located, on the East Metro, the Northwest Metro, the Southwest Metro, and Burnsville, and Red Wing down on the southeast. So you have these plants putting power on at different points in the load center essentially. And so we have to make sure that we can always deliver what our customers need. And that goes for the example you're calling out in Becker, and it goes out to some of the facilities in St. Paul and across our service territory. That is job one. The one thing I'll say is we've gotten really good at understanding our intermittent resources. So when the wind starts to pick up, we can dial the gas back. And that ability to save on fuel brings an overall savings to our customers. Now, it's not necessarily in your rate, but it's in the fuel clause. And so, again, using these different levels to help keep bills low is really the name of the game. Yes, ma'am.
Why would solar rewards be dictated by the legislature?
It's merely the enabling legislation. In order for us to have the budget, the $5 million to use to help buy down the cost of solar for those folks who want to put it on their home, we have to have enabling legislation for that. And so the legislature enabled the program in 2011 and extended it. It was a 5-year program. They've extended it once. There was some talk last year. I know some of you run around the Capitol with me a little bit to add another year, and so that's been a.
So these are state monies and not Xcel monies?
They are Xcel ratepayer monies, right. But we still need the legislature authorization if we're going to spend customer money in that way. Because, again, we're taking the money from the customers. We can't take money from our customers unless.
But your customers are dictating where the money goes. Rather than a middleman like a. legislator?
Well, I mean, we take in revenue from our customers, and how that revenue gets then ultimately spent, that's really the subject of a rate case, right?
Well, it's PUC.
Right. Right.
But this is legislative.
Right. But the legislature is the governing, and they set what the PUC. The PUC is kind of a quasi-judicial body, but the legislature gives them direction. And so all of these pieces are kind of intermingled. Yes, sir.
You mentioned that Xcel is mandated by the state to buy any power produced by a community solar. Do you know approximately what you're paying per kilowatt for that power?
We do. We are, again, this is a legislative program. The legislature required us to create this program. It gave the PUC the authority to figure out the details of it, but the enabling legislation came there. So yes, that has changed. The program was originally passed in 2013. The first couple years, it was based on the applicable retail rate. There was also a rec credit. So if it's an older vintage garden, we're probably paying, depending on the size of the garden and the customer, somewhere between 12 and 15 cents a kilowatt hour for that energy is what what the bill credit translates. And then, Steve, you probably remember this better than I do. At some point, I think it was like 2016, the PUC shifted away from that methodology and applied the value of solar methodology. The value of solar changes every year, but currently it's I'm close. I'm not going to be exactly right, but it starts out about 9 cents and escalates over the 25-year contract to some 17, 18 cents a kilowatt hour. And so that's the credit. That's the cost of the credit that we use with the customer's bill. So when I compare that cost to other resources, it is on the high side.
I mean, you could be buying, electricity is a commodity. You could be buying that power from a solar or utility scale solar farm for 3.5 cents or less per
Correct.
hour. Doesn't that drive the company crazy?
Yes. Wind is, low 20s or even 18. So $18 a megawatt hour versus what you talked about, the larger scale solar. Now, to be fair, those are current prices, right? So we can go procure large scale solar in that range, and those resources really kind of fit with a lot of our generation. So the other programs tend to be outliers. Another outlier is biomass. We started with wind and biomass at the same time, and that came out of the 1994 legislative session. And what we have seen from wind pricing has been amazing over that time frame. It has gone from essentially $130, $150 a megawatt hour down to 18. Well, biomass never changed. In fact, it's still kind of up there. If anything, it's gone up. And so one of the things that's been interesting to watch how the market has evolved is nobody could have predicted how low solar and wind prices, especially at scale, as you're pointing out, how competitive they have become. When I started 11 years ago, which, by the way, that makes me a rookie in my business, the idea that you have wind and solar at the same cost or lower than dispatchable resources, no way, never could. We couldn't even imagine that. But that trend has shined a flashlight on some other things like biomass, and so it's an interesting business because it's constantly evolving and we're constantly learning and the market conditions are changing, and we're trying to figure out how to, when we make these new investments, we don't want to make it on the high side because it goes right into the customer bill. Now, to be fair, this community solar conversation is a difficult one. It is high cost energy, that's true. There are other benefits that certainly come into play and need to be talked about. We're learning, because again, it's a relatively new program. It started in 2013 and has really evolved over the last couple of years. So we've learned a lot through that experience. And I think we're at the point in the conversation where you take the learnings, now that we have almost 1,000 megawatts or more on our system, we have that experience to learn. And so The question now becomes, do you leave it alone? Do you change it? Do you amend it? And the last couple of years at the legislature, different solar interests have brought different bills, and we're having that conversation. So we'll see how it evolves. Yes, sir.
So you mentioned electric vehicles. How wide open is the projection on electric vehicles? Like from the maximum percentages conceivable by 2030 versus what more likely to happen?
Right, so in our integrated resource plan, on the other side of the coin, where we're talking about how much energy we think our customers are going to need, we have different scenarios for different market penetration assumptions. So where we see the penetration start to move a little bit is probably in the mid-2020s and beyond. So I think in this integrated resource plan, you'll see that the modeling and what we think the demand is. When we refresh it the next time, you're probably, we'll revisit this, and those assumptions may change a little bit. It's at this point pretty manageable. We have, at this point on our system, we have capacity. And so again, our capacity starts to get a little narrow in the mid-2020s. If the uptake on EVs is going faster, we're going to have to readjust. But that's a great example about why we do these things every 2 to 3 years, because these markets are changing quickly. Yes, sir.
Yeah, with the ease of tracking data these days, what else would it take to basically scrap the meters and start tracking consumption and generation more on like an hourly or even more discrete basis? And what would Xcel think about that? Would they be in favor of it?
That's an interesting question. The scrapping the meter gives me pause because, again, different people evoke different costs on the system, and so there's an equity thing that comes to mind. How do we, if somebody's very good at conserving energy and your neighbor's not, some.
Well, I mean more like the getting rid of the physical meters and going to a different internet-based way of tracking. So you're tracking every 15 minutes or every hour, so that you can track consumption during the daylight hours when energy is at a certain price, and during night when it's at a different price.
So we do have some pilots, time of use. This is really kind of where I understand your question to be going, because our current meters are tracking usage. The customer, just because of how rates are made and the history of the business and how we've evolved, the customer is sort of insulated from that. We have a seasonal difference in the rate, but not anything like you're talking about. So one of the tools that, when we're talking about enhancing the customer experience, that is a key component of some of the things that we're thinking about. How do we give our customers the knowledge to take advantage of the different pricing? Because the system pricing is changing every 5 minutes, but we don't see that. And electric vehicles is a component of this. If you come home from work and plug in your car at 5 p.m., that's, we're a summer peaking utility. You're kind of hitting our peak. That's the most expensive energy we have. We don't want you to do that. So again, it's an education thing. When you run your dishwasher, if you go to bed at say 11 o'clock and you press the run button and it runs at night, that's cheaper energy than if you did it at 5 right after dinner when you cleaned up. And so it's the metering. It wouldn't be scrapping the metering, but it's investing in the meters so the customer can look on their phone and say, "Oh, I can change my behavior and take advantage of this and use this information to manage my bill."
So there's nothing in the legislature or regulations that are preventing you from doing it. It's just a matter of getting it off the ground.
So it's a matter of testing the technology to make sure that if we're deploying meters, that they work properly. It's about building out the application so the customer has the data in a usable format that they can understand, and that's easy. And it's about how do we recoup the investment? Because we can't change our rates, only the commission can allow us to do that. And so those are kind of 3 of the prongs of that conversation. But it's alive and well. I'm not going to get this entirely right, but I'm almost certain that it's Eden Prairie and Minneapolis and a couple other communities that are kicking off some time of use pilot programs. And again, we like to do these pilots to really get that learning. On the flip side of that issue, I do have a number of customers that are very concerned about, well, what are you doing with that data? right? How secure is that data? And those are very important issues too. And so we need to be mindful as we create all this data, and we have all these different tools, that it's still secure, that customers' privacy is protected, usage information needs to be protected. I can aggregate usage on a 15 customer basis, but I can't tell somebody what another person uses. In certain business, that information in the hands of a competitor would give them insight. So there's some real sensitivities about making sure that if we're collecting the data, that it's also being managed responsibly as well. Doug.
Question I wanted to ask you, with the new mix of generation coming into the system, I remember hearing years ago that the nuclear plants had to run like at full capacity all the time. And I've just read lately now, and I think it was from Xcel, that they are able now to throttle the nuclears down to a certain degree also. Is that true, or?
It is, and that's a great question. There's in our nuclear area, there's a lot of exciting stuff going on right now. But it's to your point, when we first started adding renewable energy on our system in the 90s, and you may remember this, our engineers said, more than 10% we can never do. We can never handle more than 10%. And again, these are the people that are entrusted to make sure that the data center in Becker has always got what it needs. So, but the point is, we've learned how to integrate that much better. And again, there's still ongoing challenges. We've got a project at St. Thomas right now that that's alive and well in terms of integrating renewables. So there's again, constant learning going on. But you're right. When I started, up until just the last maybe couple of years, when I talked with our nuclear folks, they always said, "Yeah, no, you get it and you run it." And we're in the midst of a pilot now where we are changing that outflow based on how much renewables we're getting. So back to your point, at night when our demand is low and it's a shoulder season, so spring or fall, the wind is humming, usage is low, we have seen at certain hours, like 3 a.m., enough renewable energy on the system that I could back off all my fossil and even back the nuclear, because I'm getting so much wind at that particular time and usage is low. So those are great lessons. Again, we're learning a lot as we go. So yes, the nuclear fleet is becoming a little bit more adaptable. They've done a tremendous job on lowering cost. And another kind of exciting development is we recently got a DOE grant to start looking at hydrogen production down at Prairie Island. And so to the extent that we have high renewable energy and conditions are such where we don't need that plant to be running, I could still run it to make hydrogen. And that kicks off a whole new area of learning and opportunities and such. So it's an exciting time. And like I say, I'm a rookie in this business, and there's a lot to come. So it's fun. Yes? So this is the question on nuclear, is what do you do with the spent fuel? And so currently, well, let me back up a step. So the federal government is obligated to be the final holder of the spent fuel for all of the approximately 100 nuclear plants in the United States. I think there's 96 now or something like that. So that is the federal government's obligation. They were supposed to provide a permanent storage facility by, I think it was 1998. So it's 2019. The Yucca Mountain, still not, all those things. So we have state authorization to store the spent fuel. It's either in the pool at the plant, or it is on a pad at the plant. So they are containers that are either at Monticello. It's a little different technology than at Prairie Island. They're dry cask storage. And that is obviously monitored and regulated. And again, part of the tour, we take people out and you can kind of see what that looks like. So we've run the plant down at Red Wing since the early 70s. I think it came on in 73 and 74. I don't know the exact number of casks that we have out on the pad right now. The pad is roughly the size of a football field. And so we have enough storage to run the plant through the end of licensure. So that's where those spent fuel rods sit right now.
But you were going to extend the licensure, right?
Right, so that's all part of this conversation, right? So the one thing that we are optimistic about, as I said, there's a lot of stuff going on in nuclear that's kind of exciting. We are very hopeful that the federal government, although they haven't solved the final storage question, they are establishing interim storage facilities. So we'll all consolidate our fuel in a central location. And so there are some companies in sort of southeast New Mexico and Texas that have come forward and say we want to be that place. And so there's a whole conversation about is that going to happen or not. So we're obviously watching that. If the federal government and the community, this one is a Native American community that is wanting to step forward and serve in this capacity, that if that all goes through, I want my place in line. So we want to be able to move our fuel and store that. But it's all developing as we speak. Yes, sir.
You said you had a hard time allocating what the co-generators need to do for you in that solar allocation. But in general terms, can you say what you need from the small co-generators, like us that are just putting down ground stations or solar on the roof? Or do you not need us at all to meet your solar allocation? What do you need from us? We're small co-generators.
Right.
Many of us.
The smaller systems are easy for us. The interconnection process isn't overly complicated. I guess we see you as partners. We don't operate at that scale. I think in tens and hundreds of megawatts, not in tens or a kW. So I think it's to the point that you made earlier in the conversation about, well, our customers want this. And so, we need to be responsive to our customers. Every business needs to be responsive to their customers if they're going to stick around. And so, that's the kind of the goal of the Solar Rewards program. The Solar Rewards program really is not moving the needle in any of this, but it does provide an opportunity for the customers who are passionate about, doing solar or managing their bill in that with using that tool to help manage their bill. It gives them that opportunity. And so the question is, to the legislature or others, is at what point do the declining costs in solar no longer justify the subsidy? And I think probably in the 2020s we're probably going to get there. But that's why we kind of look at that every year, because we're not quite there yet. And the solar itself is inexpensive, but obviously, economies of scale drive the cost down, and the racking on a roof is different. It's just more labor intensive than it would be on a larger scale and such. But so from our perspective, I think we really see it as a customer option, kind of a partnership, because that's not the type of generation we build. Yes, sir.
I noticed in the forecast for 2030, the percentage of other renewables went down from 8 to 2%. Are you pulling back capacity on certain renewable energy systems that you didn't find were efficient long-term, like biofuel, or do you think that the energy demands are going to quadruple in that time?
What you're really seeing there is we have a mix of own generation and power purchase agreements. And so when we do our modeling, when we have power purchase agreements with Manitoba Hydro, for example, or St. Paul Cogen, and those have those 20-year contracts are up in that planning horizon, we don't assume that they'll get renewed. We assume that they end, and so that's changing that number a little bit. Now, if we are able to again come to terms with an extension on a power purchase agreement, the next time we model it, then it'll be back in. So that number will shift as a result of the PPA dynamic. Yes, ma'am. Did you have a question? Okay, Steve.
I want to defend the community solar garden and the cost of it under PURPA and the ability for self-generation of energy. So that it is a very complicated thing.
Right.
The software modeling, the modeling software for the IRP has been this thing called Strategist. And today I hear recently I heard there's another version called Encompass. Do you think Encompass is where Xcel will go, and what kind of ability will that give you in the IRP, or how may it change the outcome?
So I don't know. That's a great question. We have always traditionally used Strategist as our modeling tool. Our resource planning team, they're the ones who run those models. I have not, you know more about it than I do, because I have not had that conversation with them. So how those, the thing about Strategist is it's a very complex model. It's often referred to as kind of the black box, because it's hard for stakeholders to kind of see what's going on there. And so we've really tried in this process now to unpack that and build transparency into the process. In fact, we asked for a 6-month extension to submitting this IRP so we could continue to work with E3 and others to try to explain what assumptions are going into this model that then comes.
And I think you got that.
Yep. So, yes, sir.
Yeah, I was curious back when you mentioned the need for more transmission. Is there a way how new renewables could be added onto the system and have it be strategically sized and sited to fit within the capacity of each adjacent substation, and in a way that would make new transmission investments not necessary, since that's something that will add to ratepayer expenses and something that the PUC will be looking at in the plan?
Yeah, that's a great question. So yes and no. We are looking at that. So I think that's how we think about batteries. We think about, can we locate batteries at substations and other facilities, at a much larger scale. We're not thinking about somebody's basement. We're thinking about, at a substation level. And how does that work in terms of, can you, by adding that storage at that particular location, you do that cost benefit analysis. And as battery prices come down, I think you'll start to see a lot of that move forward. So it right now it's kind of it's resting on the economics. We did propose a number of years ago to do a battery project at one of our subs. It didn't get the best of review from the commission. They said, think about it, go sharpen your pencil, come back. So we're doing that. At the same time, the scale of our, we're a 10,000 megawatt system. And so you're not going to completely eliminate the need for transmission just because, we have so much customer demand. And so we need to continue to bring in power from wind rich resources, Buffalo Ridge, the Dakotas and other places, into the load center to effectively use that. That will require transmission. So Doug, I know you run a tight ship. I'm a little over. I'm getting the eye maybe here. I think you have a board meeting following up now, or?
One more question. Anybody have one that's just burning that they got there you go, right there.
I'm just curious, you said several times that you're looking, and I have 11 years of your policy guy. So what's your background? How did you know so much about energy?
Well, my background is in government. Political science is where my degree is. I've learned a lot from my colleagues, and just being in this business, my knowledge tends to be pretty wide. It doesn't get real deep. As asked about, the modeling, I don't know. Some of these questions are certainly beyond my expertise. But that's the one thing I really do love about the work I do is I get to interact on a lot of these questions and then bring them back to our subject matter experts and really dive in and get to learn that. And that has accelerated over the last couple of years as I've been working with our operations people in St. Paul. It's been a great learning opportunity for me, and that translates into better policy as well. So a lot of it is learned by doing and relying on my, my colleagues who've been with the company 20, 30. I have a great employee at our High Bridge power plant, 43 years he's worked for the company. So we've got a deep bench, and I use them often.
All right, let's give Jim a hand. Huh?
Thank you.